On September 20th, 1973, during his performance at Northwestern State University in Louisiana, Jim Croce was riding a wave of growing fame. Over the past year and a half, the 30-year-old singer-songwriter had transformed from an opening act to the main performer, fueled by hits like Bad Bad Leroy Brown and Time in a Bottle. With 2 well-received albums under his belt, anticipation was high for his upcoming release, I Got a Name, set to hit the shelves the next day. But then, something unexpected happened. Join us as we journey through the extraordinary life of Jim Croce, from his rise to fame to the chilling events of that fateful night. James Joseph Croce was born on January 10, 1943, in South Philadelphia, into a working-class Italian family. From a young age, Jim listened to all kinds of music, enjoying everything from Enrico Caruso's operatic arias to Fats Waller's jazz tunes. And his musical interest grew even further when he got his first guitar, leading him to explore genres like R&B, rock and roll, country, blues, and folk. And these styles would later influence his own songwriting. Jim made history within his family by attending Villanova University and becoming the first family member to pursue higher education. In 1963, while studying at the university, 19-year-old Jim participated as a judge in a hootenanny band competition in Philadelphia, which is an informal gathering where folk music is played. And this would be where he met 16-year-old Ingrid Jacobson, a singer in the winning band. It was love at first sight, and soon the two began performing together, and in 1966, they married. While Ingrid pursued her studies in art school, Jim balanced his time between serving in the Army National Guard, teaching high school, driving a truck, and working as a DJ. But in 1966, Jim took a significant step in his music career by releasing his first album, Facets. He managed to press 500 copies of the album using a $500 wedding gift from his parents, under the condition that he would abandon his musical ambitions and would look for a more traditional profession after the album failed. However, the album turned out to be a success. Jim sold all 500 copies, most of them to fans who attended his shows at local bars, and he even made a profit of $2,500. During this period, Jim got his first steady long-term gig playing music at a bar and steakhouse in Lima, Pennsylvania, called the Riddle Paddock. His music included a mix of blues, country, rock and roll, and folk, and he quickly gathered a group of regular listeners. He and his wife Ingrid formed a duo and started performing together. Unfortunately, their first album in 1968, with Capitol Records titled Jim and Ingrid Croce, didn't sell well. In the following 2 years, they drove over 300,000 miles to perform in small venues and college campuses, trying to promote their music, but without success. They had to sell almost everything they owned, except for just one guitar, to afford to move back to the peaceful countryside of Pennsylvania, where they settled in an old farmhouse in Lindell, where he played for $25 a night. Jim and Ingrid's parties became legendary. Their house became a musical commune full of people who would one day become legends, like Bonnie Raitt, James Taylor, Arlo Guthrie, Jimmy Buffett, and Randy Newman, just to name a few. Up until this point, he and his wife hadn't made much money from music. But even during these hard times, Jim had never stopped writing songs, often inspired by the interesting people he met during his work at bars and truck stops. Jim had a special talent for observing and remembering details, which played a crucial role in the music he would create later on. Around this time, he also wrote the song Time in a Bottle, inspired by finding out that Ingrid was pregnant. This news motivated Jim to work even harder on his musical career. By 1970, after meeting and partnering with classically trained pianist, guitarist, and singer-songwriter Maury Muleisen, Jim was at a turning point in his life. After signing with ABC Records in 1971, Jim began touring through the U.S. with Muleisen, performing in large coffee houses on college campuses and at folk festivals. By September 1973, he had achieved some success but was feeling overwhelmed and burned out from all the traveling, which also kept him away from his newborn family. Plus, he was only making $200 a week because of some bad business deals, leaving him with little money to save. His wife Ingrid remembered, "There was never a time when we weren't doing music. We worked up to 12 hours a day minimum. But I think that Jim was really getting into writing and he wanted to do movies." Jim planned on taking a break after his tour was done and finally settle with his beloved Ingrid and AJ. However, on September 20th, 1973, everything changed. On that fateful Thursday, just one day before the release of the lead single I Got a Name from his fifth album, tragedy struck. At this point, Jim Croce was at the peak of his career, thriving on his Life and Times tour. That night, he was performing at the Prather Coliseum at Northwestern State University in Louisiana. Alongside Maury Muleisen, Jim played some of his greatest hits and also introduced his new song, I Got a Name. Initially, Jim had planned to stay overnight in Louisiana, but as the evening went on, Jim felt a strong urge to change his plans, and he decided he needed to leave right away. They got in touch with their pilot, who was at the Lakeview Motel, asking him to prepare for an early departure. Their next destination was Sherman, Texas, for a performance at Austin College. No one was quite sure why Jim wanted to leave so suddenly. However, a letter he wrote to his wife, Ingrid, not long before this concert might give us some clues. In the letter, Jim wrote that he was feeling tired of constantly being on the road and was missing his family, including their one-year-old son, AJ. Jim expressed his wish to spend more time with his wife and son, and even considered leaving the music industry to live a quieter life, describing himself as a public hermit. Jim ended his letter with a promise. "When I get back, everything will be different. We're going to have a life together, Ing, I promise. I'm going to concentrate on my health. I'm going to become a public hermit. I'm going to get my master's degree. I'm going to write short stories and movie scripts. Who knows, I might even get a tan. Give a kiss to my little man and tell him Daddy loves him. Remember, it's the first 60 years that count, and I've got 30 to go. I love you, Jim." After Jim's call, pilot Robert Elliott found himself without a taxi and decided to make his way to the airport on foot. Along the way, he chose to run, but he got lost and had to ask for directions at a police station around 10 p.m. When Rob finally reached the airport, he was visibly worn out. He was almost 58 and had just recovered from a heart attack he suffered just 5 months prior. The walk from the Lakeview Motel to the airport was about 3 miles, and he even got turned around and ended up running through a cornfield at one point. Now with their pilot ready, Jim, together with his bandmate Maury Muleisen, comedian George Stevens, manager and booking agent Kenneth Cortez, and road manager Dennis Rast, got on the Beechcraft E-185 plane. The pilot, 57-year-old Robert N. Elliott, methodically went through his pre-flight checks, making sure everything was in order, while Jim sat in the co-pilot seat. The engine started up, breaking the evening's calm as they all prepared for the flight ahead. But just after taking off, tragedy struck. The plane barely made it off the ground before hitting a pine tree just about 250 yards off the end of the runway. This caused a terrible crash near Highway 1, instantly killing everyone on board. Jim died at the age of 30. Dan McDonald, a sophomore at Northwestern State and a reporter for the student newspaper, was among the first to arrive at the crash site. He described the wreckage, saying, "The front half of it, you couldn't tell it was a plane. The back half was still intact, but the front half was just demolished. All you saw was fiberglass and twisted metal." The National Transportation Safety Board concluded that the crash was probably caused by the pilot's inability to see the obstruction due to physical impairment, and because fog reduced his vision. Additionally, some marijuana and other controlled substances were found in the plane's debris, and a variety of other drugs were found in the luggage and on the bodies of the passengers. The 57-year-old pilot, who had severe coronary artery disease, had run 3 miles to the airport from his motel. He had 1,290 hours total flight time and 1,190 hours in that type of Beechcraft 18 airplane. Further investigation pointed to pilot error, specifically his decision to take off downwind into what they described as a black hole into pitch darkness, which severely limited his ability to use visual cues. Taking off downwind requires a higher ground speed and a longer runway, as the plane needs more distance to lift off. Normally, pilots prefer to take off into the wind, which helps slow to the plane's ground speed but increases airflow over the wings, generating lift. This allows the plane to take off over a shorter distance and climb more steeply, avoiding obstacles like the pine tree they crashed into. However, after the crash, there was conflicting evidence about whether the pilot's negligence or a heart attack caused the plane to crash. Considering the pilot's medical history and condition, it's possible he experienced symptoms of a heart attack, most likely while he was jogging to the airport. Ironically, it was the tragic news of his plane crash that turned Jim Croce into a well-known figure across many homes, and most of his success came after his sudden passing, which sparked one of the biggest posthumous sales booms in the history of music. At the 1974 American Music Awards, Jim was posthumously awarded Favorite Male Vocalist Pop Rock, and hits from all his albums filled the top 10, with Time in a Bottle reaching number 1 in 1974, its deeply moving lyrics seemingly predicting a short life and its preciousness. The news of Jim Croce's unexpected death left his family and friends heartbroken. However, his songs and his legacy continue to live on. Jim and Ingrid's son, AJ, was a week away from his second birthday at the time of the crash, but Jim would be so proud to know that AJ grew up to follow in his footsteps, carving out his own successful career as a singer-songwriter. Jim's music has achieved incredible success, with record sales exceeding 45 million. His songs have been covered by numerous artists and featured in various films and TV shows. And in 1990, he was honored with an induction into the Songwriters Hall of Fame. Jim Croce may have left us too soon, but his music and the legacy he left behind will keep inspiring us for many years to come.